The night my father-in-law signed the deal that was supposed to save our family's company, a valet parker slipped a folded napkin into my hand and whispered, "Don't let them put your name on anything tonight." I almost laughed. I thought he'd mistaken me for someone else. I didn't laugh for long. My husband's family owned Kellerman Property Group, a mid-sized real estate development firm based out of Calgary. They'd been building condos and commercial properties across Alberta for 30 years. Not Bay Street money, not the kind of name that gets splashed across charity galas in Toronto, but solid, respectable. The kind of company where the founder's portrait still hangs in the boardroom and nobody thinks to take it down. I married into it 7 years ago. My husband, I'll call him my husband, because that's what he was, at least on paper, was the second son. His older brother ran operations. His father, my father-in-law, still held the majority stake and made every decision that mattered even after he'd officially stepped back. His mother sat on the board and wore it like a crown. I had my own career. I was a contracts analyst for an energy firm downtown. I knew how to read a deal. I knew what buried clauses looked like and what they were designed to do. My mother-in-law called my job very practical, in the tone people use when they mean unnecessary. My husband thought it was fine as long as it didn't interfere with family dinners on Sundays. 7 years. That's how long I kept my mouth shut in the right rooms. The party was held at a private event space on the 4th floor of a hotel in downtown Calgary, the kind of place with floor-to-ceiling windows and a catering team in matching vests. My father-in-law had just finalized a partnership with a Vancouver-based development group called Mercer Pacific. They were bringing capital. Kellerman was bringing the land assets and the local permits. On paper, it looked like the deal that would take the company from regional to national. Everyone was happy that night. That specific kind of happy that makes people louder than they need to be. I wore a navy dress I'd bought 2 years ago for a work function. I remember thinking I should have bought something new, then immediately feeling stupid for thinking that. I stood near the windows with a glass of sparkling water. I wasn't drinking. I had an early meeting the next morning and watched my husband shake hands with men he'd never met and laugh at things he probably didn't find funny. His older brother stood near my father-in-law the whole evening, shoulder to shoulder. They were the picture of continuity. The Kellerman men, ready for the next chapter. I wasn't sure where I fit in the picture. I'd been asking myself that question for about 2 years by then. The valet team had been stationed near the side entrance, helping guests who'd driven themselves rather than taking cabs. There were 4 or 5 of them throughout the evening, moving quietly in the margins of the party, the way service staff always do. Present enough to be useful, invisible enough not to disturb the atmosphere. I'd stepped else away from the reception to get some air near the corridor that led to the coat check. My feet hurt. I'd been standing for 2 hours and making conversation with my mother-in-law's friends, and I needed 60 seconds of not performing. That's when he appeared beside me. Young, mid-20s, maybe. Dark jacket with the hotel logo on the breast pocket. He was carrying a small stack of claim tickets, and he walked past me once, then slowed, then turned back. "Excuse me," he said quietly. "Are you Mrs. Kellerman, the daughter-in-law?" I said yes, a little warily. He reached into his jacket pocket and held out a folded square of paper, a cocktail napkin, the kind they'd been using at the bar all evening. He pressed it into my hand like he was passing me something fragile, and he leaned in just slightly. "Don't let them put your name on anything tonight," he said. "Please." Then he walked away. I stood there for a moment, the napkin in my hand. My first instinct was to assume he'd confused me with someone. My second instinct was to open the napkin. Inside, in small, careful handwriting, the side agreement. Page 4, your personal liability. They didn't tell you. I folded it back up and put it in my clutch. My heart was doing something strange. Not racing, more like slowing down, getting very deliberate, the way your body does when it's trying to help you think. I looked across the room. My husband was still talking to the Mercer Pacific people. My father-in-law was laughing at something. My mother-in-law caught my eye from across the room and gave me a small, tight smile. The kind she always gave me, the one I'd spent years trying to decode. I thought, there's a reasonable explanation for this. Hotel staff sometimes overhear things. Maybe he'd misheard something. Maybe this was nothing. But I also thought, that's specific. That's not a guess. I went to find the young man. He was near the side exit, alone for a moment, organizing a row of claim tickets on a small table. I approached him and stood beside him like I was looking at my phone. "Tell me what you know," I said, keeping my voice low. He didn't look at me directly. He kept his hands moving over the tickets. "My uncle works for the law firm that drafted the partnership agreement," he said. "Not Kellerman's lawyers. Mercer Pacific's. He came home 2 nights ago and he was upset. He doesn't usually talk about work, but he said something that he shouldn't have, and I've been thinking about it since. What did he say? He said the side agreement has a personal guarantee clause. It's written so that if the partnership defaults within the first 3 years, the liability doesn't fall on Kellerman Property Group as a corporation. It falls on individual family members who signed. He paused. He said your name was on the list of signatories, along with your father-in-law and your brother-in-law. I felt the floor shift slightly, the way it does when you stand up too fast. I'm not a signatory on anything, I said. I'm not on the board. I have nothing to do with the operational side. He finally looked at me. My uncle said they added your name because you're the only one with an independent income stream and assets not tied to Kellerman. If the deal goes sideways, they'd come after what's yours. I held very still. Why are you telling me this? I asked. He was quiet for a moment. Because my uncle was upset. Because he said it wasn't right and he couldn't say anything himself without losing his job. And because he hesitated. Because 3 years ago, I was in a bad situation. A tenant dispute, my landlord was trying to illegally evict me. I couldn't afford a lawyer. I called the tenant resource line, and the woman who helped me, she stayed on the phone with me for 2 hours. She helped me draft a response letter. I kept my apartment. He paused again. She had a Kellerman Properties business card in the background of her screen. I always wondered if she worked for your family. I thought about that. I work in contracts, I said. Energy sector, not real estate. But I've helped people with lease language before. He nodded slowly. I thought it might be you. I went to the restroom and sat in the farthest stall for 4 minutes. I ran through what I knew. The partnership agreement, the main one, the one I'd been shown, was a standard co-development deal. I'd glanced at it 2 weeks ago when my husband left it on the kitchen counter, not because anyone asked me to look at it, but because I can't help reading documents when they're in front of me. It had looked straightforward. 2 entities, shared capital, shared risk, limited liability on both sides. But I hadn't seen a side agreement. No one had mentioned a side agreement. And the thing about side agreements is that they're real. They're used all the time in complex deals to allocate specific terms outside the main contract. Things that one party doesn't necessarily want visible in the primary document. They're not inherently sinister, but they can be. A personal guarantee clause that extended liability to me, my income, my RRSP, the condo I'd owned before I was married and kept in my own name, that would be a very different thing from anything I'd agreed to. I hadn't agreed to anything. I hadn't signed anything. They added your name. I needed to see that document. My husband came to find me about 20 minutes later. He looked flushed, pleased with himself, the way he always looked at family events when things were going well. There you are, he said. Where have you been? Dad wants to do the photos soon. I've been around, I said. Can I ask you something? Sure. He reached out and straightened the strap of my dress, a reflex more than a gesture. Is there a side agreement attached to the Mercer Pacific deal? Outside the main partnership contract? Something shifted in his face. Not much. He was good at not showing things. 7 years of marriage, and I'd learned to watch for the micro-expressions, the small adjustments. Where did you hear that? Is there? There are supplementary documents in any deal this size. That's standard. Is my name on any of them? He looked at me for a moment. I'm not doing anything. I'm asking a question, Lena. He said my name in that particular way. The way that meant calm down, you're making things uncomfortable. This isn't the place. Then tell me the place, I said. And tell me when. Because if my name is on a document that creates personal liability without my knowledge or consent, that's not a family conversation. That's a legal one. His jaw tightened. You're being dramatic. I looked at him for a long moment. I'm going to need to see every document associated with this deal, I said. Tonight, if possible. He walked away. I found my father-in-law near the bar, with 2 of the Mercer Pacific executives. I waited until there was a natural break, then stepped in. Congratulations, I said, smiling the smile I'd been practicing for 7 years. What a night. My father-in-law beamed. He was in his element, the patriarch, the deal-maker, the man who'd built something from nothing and was now watching it grow larger. Lena, come. He put a hand on my shoulder and turned to the men beside him. My daughter-in-law. Sharp as a tack, this one. Works in contracts, can you believe it? Useful to have around. The men smiled politely. I actually had a question about the supplementary agreement, I said, still smiling, keeping my voice light. The one with the personal guarantee structure. I want to make sure I understand my role in it. The smile didn't leave my father-in-law's face, but it relocated, moved from his eyes down to his mouth only. We can discuss that Monday, he said. Of course, I said. I just want to confirm. My name is on that document. One of the Mercer Pacific men looked between us with the careful blankness of someone who has just realized he's witnessing a private moment. Monday, my father-in-law said again, firmer. Absolutely, I said. I'll need my own legal counsel present, of course. I hope that's not a problem. I watched something move across his face, something I'd never seen there before in 7 years. I texted my best friend from the restroom. She's a family lawyer in Edmonton. Not corporate, but she knows people, and more importantly, she knows me. I typed, need a corporate contracts lawyer tomorrow morning. Something came up, not a drill. She called me back in 4 minutes. I stood in the corridor and told her everything in a low voice, and she listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about her. Okay, she said when I was done. Don't sign anything tonight. Don't agree to anything verbally either. If they produce a document and ask you to initial it, decline and say you need to review it with counsel. They haven't produced anything in. Good, keep it that way until morning. I'll have someone for you by 9. What do you think it is? I asked. She was quiet for a moment. It could be innocent. Side agreements with personal guarantees exist in legitimate deals. But if they added your name without disclosing it to you, that's a problem regardless of the intent. Why would they do that? Because you're the only one in that family with clean credit and independent assets, she said. Your house is in your name. Your RRSP is yours. If the deal goes south, the corporate assets take the first hit, and then they'd come for the personal guarantors. She paused. Lena, does your husband know his name is on it too? I thought about the look on his face when I'd asked him. Yes, I said. I think he does. The rest of the evening I moved through like I was made of glass, careful, surface level, smiling at the right moments. My mother-in-law asked if I was feeling well. I said I had a bit of a headache. She said I should drink more water, which was the most useful thing she'd said to me in years. My husband didn't come to stand beside me for the rest of the night. I noticed that. My father-in-law gave a short speech about legacy and partnership and what it means to build something that lasts. Everyone raised their glasses. I raised mine. I thought about the word legacy and what it actually means when you take it apart. What you're leaving behind, and for whom, and whether the people who receive it have a choice in the matter. By 9:15 the next morning, I was sitting in a boardroom on the 14th floor of an office building on 8th Avenue with my friend and a corporate lawyer named Arthur Fenn, who had 40 years of commercial real estate experience and the kind of quiet that meant he'd seen everything at least twice. I'd spent the night pulling together everything I could access: emails, the main partnership agreement, any correspondence that had come through our shared household accounts. I hadn't slept much. I'd made a lot of notes. Arthur read through what I had. He asked for the side agreement, and I told him I hadn't been provided a copy. That's the first problem, he said. If you're named as a signatory on a document, you're entitled to a copy before you sign. If they've listed you as a guarantor without your signature, that's a different issue entirely, and likely unenforceable, but it tells you something about what they intended. What does it tell you? I asked. He looked at me over his reading glasses. It tells me someone assumed you'd sign whatever was put in front of you. What followed was not a dramatic confrontation. Real life rarely works that way. What followed was a series of uncomfortable meetings, some legal letters, one very long phone call with my father-in-law in which he said I was making this into something it wasn't. And I said I simply wanted everything in writing before I agreed to anything, which is not an unreasonable position for someone with a contracts background. It came out that my name had been added to the guarantee schedule 2 weeks before the signings event. My husband had been aware. He hadn't told me because, and I'm using his words here, he didn't think I'd understand the commercial rationale and he didn't want me to worry. I had never wanted to throw something so much in my entire life. And I have a fairly long fuse. Arthur reviewed the side agreement when Kellerman's lawyers finally produced it under pressure. The personal guarantee clause was real. It would have made me personally liable for up to $400,000 in the event of a default within the first 3 years. Secured against my home and any registered accounts in my name. My husband's liability was capped differently, tied to company shares rather than personal assets. In other words, if the deal went wrong, they'd have come for my house, not the company assets, mine. I didn't sign. The deal restructured without my guarantee. Mercer Pacific pushed back, but not hard enough to walk away, which told Arthur they'd expected the clause to be a formality, not a real negotiation point. My father-in-law called it a betrayal. He used that word. In front of his wife and both his sons, in the kitchen of their house in Tuscany Park, he said I had betrayed the family by refusing to support a deal that would have secured their future. I thought about what it means to call a woman's refusal to unknowingly assume debt a betrayal. I didn't say out loud. I'd learned something, in all of this, about which arguments are worth having. My husband and I separated 8 months later. That's a separate story and a long one. And it doesn't fit neatly into this one, except to say that the night of that party was the first time I understood clearly that we had different definitions of what marriage meant. He thought it meant I would trust him enough not to ask questions. I thought it meant he would trust me enough to tell me the truth. We were both wrong about each other, in the end. I want to tell you about the Valet Parker before I finish. His name was Owen. He'd given me that information the night of the party when I'd pressed him for it. Quietly, quickly, like he wasn't sure he should. I'd written it on the same napkin he'd given me and tucked it away. 3 months after the party, once things had settled enough that I could think clearly again, I tracked him down through the hotel's event staff registry. I left a message asking if he'd be willing to meet. He came to the coffee shop near my office on a Wednesday afternoon, a little wary, a little unsure why I'd asked. I told him what had happened. I told him what that napkin had meant. He said he was glad I was okay. He said he'd been nervous about giving it to me, that he'd gone back and forth about it all evening, that he almost didn't do it. I asked him about himself. He was finishing a paralegal diploma at SAIT. He was doing the valet work on weekends to cover his tuition gap. About $3,200 left in his final semester. I wrote him a check right there at the table. He tried to decline it. I told him that wasn't an option. He said, "You don't owe me anything." I said, "You're right, but I want to." He sent me a message 6 months later when he finished his diploma. He'd already been offered a position at a downtown firm. He thanked me again, and I told him what I really believed. That he'd done something hard and right on a night when it would have been much easier to look the other way, and that kind of thing deserves to be recognized. I still have the napkin. It's in the drawer of my desk at home, folded into a small square. I don't look at it often, but I know it's there. It reminds me that the people who show up for you at the most important moments are rarely the ones you expected, and that the most useful thing I ever did, the thing that made any of this possible, was learn how to read a contract and never, ever sign something I hadn't read.